China and the United States have recently been involved in significant events. In China, on the international stage, it organized talks in Beijing among 14 Palestinian factions, signed the Beijing Declaration, and agreed the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, to be the only representative of Palestinian people, ending Palestine's 17-year political division and forming a coalition unity. On the domestic front, China recently concluded its third plenary session of the 20th Central Committee of the CPC, strategically deploying across various sectors such as economy, politics, livelihood, and the environment. Meanwhile, during this period, the U.S. has witnessed a contentious presidential debate, followed by assassination attempt on former President and potential future President Trump, alongside current President Biden's withdrawal from candidacy. However, these events echo a familiar pattern. 8 years ago, Trump's victory over Hillary Clinton, supported by invisible voters, shocked the world. 4 years ago, amidst the Black Lives Matter movement and pandemic management failure, Trump resigned and Biden assumed office. Yet, examine Biden's and Trump's pledges such as reshoring manufacturing, controlling inflation, and managing the pandemic, it appears their impacts have not been pronounced. The most noticeable change, U.S. living prices have nearly doubled compared to 8 years ago. It appears that the U.S. may have lost its capacity to effectively address substantive issues. The 2012 HBO miniseries Game Change told a story about how elections in the age of social media are more about choosing political celebrities than solving real problems or bridging divides. Sarah Palin was chosen by the Republican Party as McCain's running mate and vice presidential candidate due to pressure from competing with political celebrities like Obama. They had to select a pro-life woman with traditional values. While the film clearly pointed out how public opinion in the social media age has pushed elections into unpredictable directions, it wasn't until Trump's election as U.S. president that everyone realized populism would inevitably become the norm in American political ecology. That is, democracy in the social media age was bound to become populist. In the era of print media, election-related information was mostly disseminated through newspapers. Only the well-educated upper class or middle class could read and disseminate this information to others. The global elite controlled the flow of information, then spreading election news from the middle class to the lower class. The process of transmitting information required time. Even Mark Twain's running for governor exposed the unscrupulous competition and muscling between different parties in detail, but readers still need time to understand and digest it. In reality, political information required them to spend the morning reading the newspaper. With the advent of radio and television, elections became more like a show than a serious reading activity. Presidents began to have professional makeup and PR teams selling their personal charm like products. A candidate's charisma became a crucial means of gaining votes, overshadowing the dissemination of viewpoints. Particularly successful speeches were even made into videos and widely distributed worldwide. It was also during this era that presidents lost their privacy. Their personal lives were packaged and sold, tied to their political viewpoints as part of the show. In the era of social media, smartphones became the medium for information dissemination. Campaigning as a candidate became less important. Voters' identities and self-expression became paramount. Presidential elections became a battle for attention, with success hinging on who could best channel voters' emotions. In the past, people at least cared about the president's persona, character, and family, like Nixon's downfall due to Watergate or Clinton's due to the Lewinsky scandal. Now, people can almost completely ignore Trump's 34 serious offenses and Biden's various sensational scandals. because their attention is constantly being diverted by bizarre internet events. Meanwhile, presidential elections have become outlets for societal emotions. Whether it's the 2021 Capitol riot or the Black Lives Matter movement, whoever becomes US president seems destined to become a lightning rod for societal emotions. This emotional trend in US politics is making re-election increasingly difficult. People are more prone to disappointment, anger, and resignation, rejecting the status quo without offering any clear direction. 21st century American voters care less about the feasibility of policy proposals and more about catchy slogans. They care less about consensus among other Americans and more about their own group's ideas. They even care less about a politician's character and more about whether they can pretend to emphasize. By these standards, American politics only needs to select actors who fit the demographic profile based on big data research results. Since the visa-free transit policy is implemented by China, more and more foreign travelers have been choosing China as their destination. Many of them have filmed videos documenting their travels in China and uploaded the videos to platforms like TikTok and YouTube. Some enthusiastic Chinese viewers have even transferred these videos to Chinese video platforms. These videos' viewership is higher than travel videos from other countries. Moreover, the titles directly reverse the stereotypes created by Western mainstream media. These videos are not focused on traditional Chinese attractions and hotels, but on people's livelihood, including subways, airports, food, supermarkets, prices, etc. These videos also convey one of the core issues of Chinese politics: everything is for the people. This is undoubtedly the best interpretation of Chinese democracy. As the Soviet Union collapsed at the end of the last century, many countries and their intellectuals began to regard multi-party repetitive elections as the most perfect system and democracy itself. For domestic politics, they believed that the solution to problems is to replace the ruling party rather than solving the problem from the root. For international politics, superpowers like the US are keen to export this system they believe is perfect. Ignoring the different political and economic backgrounds and productivity levels of all countries, the US believes that the result that most people are satisfied with can be achieved through the subjective judgment of the majority in their votes. Therefore, once countries with low productivity levels adopt this system, they cannot reach a consensus for development and fall into endless quarrels. In the end, the traders among them sell out their national interests to the superpower in exchange for external supports to stabilize their regime. It turns out that most people, regardless of their level of education, interests, or judgment, do not know what is right. They merely rely on their limited life experiences to believe that one side in an election is right and the other is wrong, and thus cast their votes accordingly. Ruling elites who truly control the country have even begun to rely on professional advertising and PR firms to use marketing and big data strategies to sway public opinion, rather than trying to solve real problems. This continues until public opinion begins to backfire on the core of power. Although the 2024 US presidential election has just begun, many dramatic events have already occurred. Whether it's the 2 consecutive presidential re-election failure, Trump narrowly dodging the bullet, or the hillbilly's favorite best-selling author J.D. Vance being chosen as Trump's running mate, this presidential election has already shown a crazy atmosphere different from the past. Furthermore, if we look around the world, we will find that the Western countries that used to pride themselves on their freedom and democracy, as well as the developing nations that were forced to adopt Western-style democratic systems, are now mired in chaos due to what they champion and believe in. In contrast, China, the target of their criticisms, has a sustainable and stable political system, making it possible to conduct continuous self-renewal. 2024 is a big election year. There will be general election in 76 countries or regions around the world, and more than 100 elections will take place. The affected population accounts for 41% of the world. The elections in developed countries such as France and the United States will have great impacts on the world in the next 5 years. Whether it is the Russia-Ukraine war or the Palestine-Israel war, the outcome will be deeply affected. In recent years, far-right movements have become a critical force in elections across Europe and the Americas. However, compared to those of World War II, today's far-rights have clearly chosen a very different path. The far-rights of the past were aggressive and expansionist. In contrast, today's far-rights prefer to disengage from the world and advocate for deglobalization. What has changed over these decades? Western developed countries have conducted industrial and financial colonization globally for the past few hundred years. So why do they now like to use trade sanctions as a weapon and frequently threaten to decouple? This is, of course, due to the loss of manufacturing in Western countries, has become a settled fact. In the past, American isolationism aimed to distance the country from Europe's endless wars and focus on development. Now, it seeks to salvage a manufacturing sector that cannot be revived. However, financiers have now become de facto rulers of the country. When financial transactions could be completed in 0.01 seconds, the well-being of Rust Belt workers becomes far less significant. The so-called multi-party competitive electoral democracy has, in this progress, turned into a grand show where a few ruling elites manipulate political stars to deceive the people. In the past, there was a myth of Oriental despotism prevalent both globally and within Chinese intellectual circles. This myth held that maritime civilizations tended to develop individualistic democratic cultures, while river civilizations were inclined to develop collectivist authoritarian cultures. Thus, it can be deduced that maritime civilization is superior to the river civilization. Hegel even believed that Chinese history was a simple repetition. In fact, both China's ancient and modern political systems are much more mature and complicated than these people imagine. Mr. Qian Mu pointed out in many of his works that China has established a very unified and modern administrative system as early as about 200 years before Christ, the Qing dynasty. Moreover, since about 100 years before Christ, the Han Dynasty, China has combined the Confucian moral system with the legalist legal system to encourage people to be kind and united, respect the elderly and love the young, and obey laws and regulations. While in Western Christian civilization, the Church has long dominated religious affairs, the Church implemented the divine right of kings to control the ruling class, as well as used the doctrine of original sin and indulgences to discriminate against other ethnic minorities and exploit lower-class workers. For those who firmly believe in the superiority of the Christian civilization, they may never be able to understand the ancient political wisdom of the East.